Welcome, everyone, to episode 4 of Midlife Unleashed. If you've ever felt like you're doing everything right, eating well, working out, and the scale just won't budge, today's episode is for you and probably myself as well. We're talking about one of the biggest culprits behind midlife weight gain that just doesn't get enough attention, which is stress and cortisol. And I know that this topic is super misunderstood, so I am very eager to jump right in and learn a little bit more about it and how our listeners can go ahead and manage this. Doug, why don't you go ahead? Can you break it down for us? What exactly is cortisol and why does it have such an impact on our weight as well as our metabolism?
Yeah, so cortisol is a stress hormone, and it's a crucial part of our survival system. So it helps regulate our metabolism, our blood sugar levels, inflammation, and even our blood pressure. And so you want to look at it as kind of like your body's alarm system. And it kicks in whenever you need extra energy, right? And the problem is when your stress levels remain high and cortisol becomes chronic, then you've got elevated levels. And instead of it actually helping you, then it starts to hurt you, right? And so high cortisol levels increase insulin resistance, and that makes it a lot harder for your body to process glucose efficiently. And rather using it as energy, your body stores it as fat, especially in the midsection, which no one seems to like,
Right.
But from an evolutionary standpoint, your body thinks that it needs to consume or conserve, energy for survival. And so it's storing, waiting for the moment to actually come when you need that extra energy.
And why do you think that it seems to hit harder in midlife compared to when we're younger, for example?
Yeah, well, when we're 20 and 30, our bodies are resilient, right? They recover much faster from everything, not just stress, but from poor sleep, from eating poorly, from not exercising. Our body's just much more resilient, right? Once you hit midlife, 40s and 50s, things change, right? So our estrogen levels are down, our testosterone levels are down, and those things kind of help regulate cortisol. So now when we have cortisol spikes, they're much more intense and it takes us much longer to recover from them. And as you reach midlife, your body takes much longer to recover from a lot of things, right? But cortisol, unfortunately, is one of those things, especially with those other hormones decreasing. And so the impact of it is much more prevalent as we age.
Got it. And when you say manage it, what are ways that someone can manage their cortisol?
Yeah, so there's several ways. All right. So, I'm an exercise guy. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is that you need to do some strength training. And that's just not just me. That's what the science says as well, right? Strength training will help you maintain your metabolism. It helps with insulin resistance. And it actually will help you to produce more growth hormone, testosterone, which actually combat cortisol levels. So the first thing you need to do is you got to exercise. You got to exercise, 3 to 4 times a week, strength training. The next thing I would recommend, which, is very, very important to all my clients, is you got to do some sort of guided meditation or some sort of deep breathing, 10 minutes a day. That's all it takes. But your body goes through a process when it's under stress. And all these processes kick off in your body, and it's actually amazing. But you have to find some way to bring them back down. And that's what the box breathing does. That's what the deep relaxation does. That's what the guided meditation does. So it helps to bring those processes back down to a normal level. And then the third thing is you got to sleep. You got to work on the sleep. You want to get those 7 to 9 hours. Recovery is very important. Less sleep, higher cortisol levels. So you got to make sure you're limiting those blue lights before you go to bed. You got to make sure you're going to bed at the same time or a consistent time. Got to make sure the room's cool. All those things that everyone knows, you really got to kick them into play, especially if you've got elevated cortisol levels.
Right. And talking about that and going back to how stress impacts cortisol, I know a lot of people also think that stress is something that's just mental. But how does chronic stress actually affect the body on a biological level?
Question. I mean, and it's not just mental because people see it. They see it, they feel it, right? And so the first thing it's going to, produce is insulin resistance, which is going to, end up being fat storage on your body. And unfortunately, it's going to be in your midsection, so that's the first thing that's going to happen. The second thing that's going to happen is you're going to be somewhat irritable and you may have some anxiety. You may have some mood swings related to it. The third thing that it does is it elevates your blood pressure. And so you actually being prepared for some sort of flight or fight situation and your body's trying to produce as much energy as it can so that you can actually fight. And then there's no fight. It's a computer screen or it's a person or it's a life situation. And so now all those things continue to go on and they start to impact your health in a variety of different ways. You may feel it in your digestion, so a lot of people have stomach issues that are caused by elevated cortisol levels. So there's a lot of ways that it's going to impact your body. And one of the most important things you can do is kind of recognize it and then make sure you've got a plan to kind of deal with it.
Mm-hmm. And for example, I know you just touched on for example, like stomach aches and things like that, but are there warning signs that someone might have a stress-related weight gain?
Yeah. So the first sign of stress-related weight gain is when you're eating your normal diet or eating a healthy diet, but you're storing weight in your midsection. Right. So that's probably the first, excuse me, that's probably the first sign that something may be going a little bit awry. All right. The second thing would be constant cravings, right? Craving sugar, craving carb type food, because remember, your body's in fight or flight mode. So it's looking for energy. And so where do we get fast, quick energy from? Sugar, carbs, right? And so if you're constantly craving those things, it could definitely be more of a stress-related scenario. Again, your mood swings, irritability, not being able to sleep, like sleep disruption, having a hard time getting to sleep, having a hard time staying asleep, right? Waking up from a night's sleep and still feeling tired and unrested. Never feeling like you can get your energy right. Those are all kind of signals that, that weight gain may be related to high cortisol levels or stress.
Interesting. And I know when it comes to losing weight and weight gain and things like that, there's just a lot of bad advice floating around about stress and weight gain. I feel like we're oversaturated with all this information. But what, in your expertise, what are some of the biggest myths that you hear people say that we just need to stop believing?
Well, one is that, people see the weight gain and what they try to do is they try the typical less calories, move more. And that doesn't work with stress-related weight gain, right? You are not going to out exercise or out eat a stress related weight gain. All right. It's just the opposite. Matter of fact, if you go too far and you cut your calories too low, or if you exercise too much or excessively, all you're going to do is increase cortisol levels. All right. Just the opposite of what you want to do. So the whole eat less, move more, that's a myth that is not going to work with stress-related, weight gain. So that's something that people really want to be aware of. because that's never going to work. It's actually just going to make it worse. I had a woman I was just talking with the other day, and she was talking about this weight gain in the midsection, of course. And one of the things she was doing was she wasn't eating in the morning, and she was going to an hour-long boot camp. So all she was doing was just stepping on the gas and just increasing cortisol. And she had high cortisol levels, by the way. She knew it. It was identified in her blood work. So all she was doing was just making the situation worse. So the whole eat less, move more, that does not work when it comes to high cortisol levels. The other thing I say, the other myth that's out there is that, again, and you mentioned it, that it's mental. No, it's not just mental. It is absolutely physical also, so you have to change some of the ways that you behave and the way that you recover your body and the way you treat your body and all those things, because it's not just something that's necessarily in your head. It's just as much physical as it is mental, and people need to be aware of that.
Great. So when they say cutting calories and exercising more can help you lose weight, not the case for cortisol or related weight gain. But if that was someone who had healthier levels, would that be something that could potentially be true? For example, cutting calories and exercising more, if it's not stress related?
Temporarily, that always works temporarily. So there's a fine line right there. And so if exercising more means you haven't been doing anything and you start exercising 3 days a week, yeah, that's exercising more, and that's going to be beneficial to you, right? And if you're eating 3,000 calories a day and your daily need is 2,500 and you cut it down to 2,500 or cut it down to 2,200, yeah, that method of cutting calories and moving more, that works. That works. But generally, that's not how people use it. They cut their calories too low, and then they try to move too much, and it doesn't work. And another thing that most people don't understand is that exercise is a stressor. It is a stressor, right? And so there's a sweet spot with that, because exercise is extremely beneficial to you. Too much exercise is harmful, and it will increase your cortisol levels, and it'll make it very difficult to lose weight.
And I bet that sounds like it would be a fine line as well, from my understanding, or correct me if I'm wrong, but someone who's trying to work out, if they're working out too much and like not the right amount, that could be a stressor when they're just trying to actually be active and do the right thing by their bodies.
Yeah, well, excessive exercise is harmful to your long-term health, right? It is going to increase cortisol. It is going to keep them up. Oftentimes I find when people are exercising too much, they're also not emphasizing recovery. And recovery is very important, not only to exercise, but definitely if you got high cortisol levels, you need to give just as much emphasis to recovery as you do to exercise and eating right, because recovery is very important.
What would you say is the best way for recovery, or something you'd recommend for someone who's working out and needs that recovery phase?
Yeah, well, the first thing is don't do too much exercise. The second thing is proper nutrition for the amount of exercise that you're doing. And then, of course, the third thing is sleep. Right? Sleep's the ultimate recovery method, And then if you're stressed or you have high cortisol levels, you have to manage your stress, right? And as far as I'm concerned, stress needs to be part of any weight loss program. Even if you're not stressed at the time, it's coming your way. And being able to manage it when it does will help with your weight loss as well. So those four things, it's all about exercise, nutrition, managing your stress, and then getting adequate sleep. All of those will help with your recovery.
And I know previously you mentioned people tend to also store a lot of weight around their midsection or their belly. I know you often say stress belly is real. So what's really happening when people notice that weight gain around their midsection despite a healthy diet?
Yeah, so the storage in the midsection is, again, it's energy, right? Your body's getting ready for something or storing it up, getting ready for the fight that never seems to happen. But that storage in the midsection can be dangerous because now we're not talking subcutaneous fat. Now we're talking about visceral fat. And that visceral fat around the organs is indicative of insulin resistance, but more important, heart disease. And so those are things that you really don't want to be dealing with. And the more you store in that midsection, the more visceral fat that you have, the more disease and potential impact to your health you're going to experience. And that stuff is inflammatory too. So that visceral fat is kicking off inflammatory chemicals, and that's causing your body other problems. So now, the stress is storing the fat. Now the fat is causing some stress, and you got this vicious cycle going, and your midsection just continues to grow. But it's primarily because you're storing fat around your organs, and that is absolutely unhealthy. So one of the things that we like to do, or one of the reasons I use my Evo scale versus the scale that you just stand on, is it tells me what the visceral fat is and the area and how much, and gives me a range that we can kind of identify, hey, your visceral fat is way too high. Not only do we need to make sure we got better nutrition and sound exercise, but we also got to make sure that stress management becomes a part of your routine to make sure that visceral fat doesn't come back to kind of hurt you.
And for someone who might be struggling or listening to this today, and they think that this might apply to them, what's the best way for someone to confirm that? Would it be like a blood work panel, which I know you kind of touched on, or what's the best way for someone to say, hey, I'm working out, I'm eating healthy, and I'm having this weight carried around my midsection?
Yeah. So, of course, blood tests would be great, right? That always is key to getting to the truth, right? Mm-hmm. And then the second thing is I would definitely use a biometric scale, which could give you a lot more information about what type of fat, where it is, hydration levels, a whole bunch of other things could be the cause. And then you got to do an assessment, right? You know whether or not you're stressed or not. Now, oftentimes when you're running around at a high stress level, you kind of forget that you're running around at a high stress level because it becomes the norm. But you really do have to do an assessment of your stress levels and then look for those symptoms that we talked about. Like, is your sleep, inadequate? Is it disruptive? How do you feel? Right? What are your cravings? All those are indicators, as well.
I know, Doug, you help people every day who do struggle with stress-related weight gain. But what would you say are like the top 3 simple science-backed strategies that listeners can start implementing today?
Again, the weight training. You need the weight training. You got to do the resistance training. It'll help increase growth hormone, testosterone. It'll help maintain your metabolism, which will help keep the weight off. It'll also help with insulin resistance. It just does so many things that just doing some compound movements for 30 minutes, 3 times a week, that will be huge in terms of helping you manage your cortisol or stress levels. Second, proper nutrition. That always comes into play, right? Limiting the processed foods and the sugar. All they do is increase the cortisol levels. I throw alcohol in there as well. But getting proper balanced nutrition always plays a part. And then you got to manage it. One thing that I see probably is rampant in this society is that we just do not practice stress management techniques. Taking 10 minutes for guided meditation doesn't cost you anything but 10 minutes. and we waste 10 minutes every day on social media or doing some foolishness. But it will help bring your body from fight or flight down to rest and digest. And that's a much better place to be, especially for fat loss, especially if your goal is to lose weight. So those are like, the scientific ways to kind of bring down those cortisol levels. Supplementation is one as well. So, doing some supplementation would help. But those are keys. Those are key.
I know you also touched on metabolism and how that plays a role. What are some ways that people listening or people struggling can actually boost their metabolism as well?
Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about strength training because that's the number one way.
Right.
Right? That's the number one way. Right. And then you got to eat for it. So that's where the protein comes in. They actually build those muscles that's going to keep your metabolism rolling. And then you got to drink water, so that your body's properly hydrated. So you're not dehydrated, performing at a low level. And you want your organs to be, properly nourished as well. Then you want to manage your stress, obviously. And then sleep. The recovery part is very important to your metabolism. Those are the best ways to do it.
And I know we've talked a lot about strength training and working out, but when it comes to working out, and we talked about weight training, but what's the best type of exercise for someone who is dealing with chronic stress and weight gain? And beyond strength training, what are things that they should avoid?
Yeah, that's a great question there. And this will be useful information for somebody who's really dealing with this because, like I said, exercise is a stressor. So if you're already stressed, we don't want to do too much. So let's talk about what they should do first. And what they should do is they should do some strength training, as we discussed. All right. 2 to 4 days. I like to say 3 days as the sweet spot. Compound movements, push-ups, squats, deadlifts, those type of exercises. Not to exhaustion, but to actually maintain their musculature and keep their metabolism up and ward off insulin resistance. All right. That's one part. The second part is they need some low-level cardiovascular activity, right? So now here is when the walking and the yoga and the mobility work kind of comes into play, because what you want to do is to be able to move and exercise without increasing cortisol levels. So that's why it's got to be a low level of intensity. I prefer myself mobility work versus walking, simply because at midlife, everything doesn't move the way it used to, right? My spine's not as agile as it used to. My joints don't have as much mobility as they used to. So I like to work on mobility, nice and easy, nothing super strenuous. It's movement, it's activity, it's sustainable, and it'll help you to burn a little bit of fat without increasing the cortisol levels. So that's what I would do. I do that a couple days a week, but the strength training I would get in at least 3 days a week. Things we want to avoid: high intensity interval training, right? If your cortisol levels are high, beating the hell out of your body and trying to take it to 10 out of 10 on the scale of exhaustion is not a good idea. All right. Especially if you're not prioritizing recovery. So you might want to do that 1 day a week, but if your cortisol levels are high, I would avoid it. Personally. And then, the other thing that you want to avoid is excessive cardio, right? Doing long workouts, right? Going out, running 5-10 miles or, doing long boot camps, that can actually be catabolic also. So not only now is that increasing your cortisol level, but it's actually starting to burn muscle, which is going to bring your metabolism down, Excuse me. So I'd stay away from both of those. And then the third thing that I think is important, which we've said a couple times, is you got to prioritize recovery. You got to prioritize recovery. You got to prioritize, nutrients after the workouts. The workouts have to be smart. And then you got to make sure that you're getting some quality rest.
And in terms of strength training, I know we touched on that a lot.
Can I say one more thing? I got to say one more thing. And I'm sorry, but it's no fasted workouts. If your cortisol levels are high, do not go into the gym on an empty tank. Okay. Looking to get productivity done. Okay. You must eat some food and give your body some nutrients prior to your workout. So important. All you're going to do is just jack your cortisol levels up even higher.
And how do you feel about fasted workouts for someone who isn't struggling with specific cortisol issues?
Yeah, well, if your cortisol levels aren't high, then I would do them time to time. I wouldn't make it a regular activity. All you're going to do is slowly drive your cortisol levels up, right? Mm-hmm. And so fasting has its place, and fasted workouts has its place in a fat loss program, but it's not an everyday thing, right? Your fat loss program is not an everyday program. Okay. So there's a time and a place. And usually, I use fasted workouts after I've ate too much, right? Mm. So I've consumed too many calories the night before. The last thing I want to do is get up and consume some more, right? I haven't had a chance to burn them off. So instead of consuming more, I'll go to the gym, I'll work out, I'll burn those calories off before I then begin to consume more.
And if someone is struggling with cortisol issues and let's say they overeat the night before, should they then wake up in the morning and still eat before they work out? Or since fasting isn't recommended for someone who is struggling with cortisol issues?
Yeah, well, in that situation, depending upon how much they overate, I might consider it. Mm-hmm. I might consider it. But that workout would still have to be the way I described it. It would have to be a strength workout with some low-level cardio. All right, so I wouldn't go and do a fasted treadmill run or some sort of high-intensity interval workout. That I would not do no matter what with high cortisol levels, no matter how much I ate or overate the night before.
And we've talked so much about strength training, but when you say strength training, are there specific workouts or things that someone with elevated cortisol or struggling in this area should do? Like, what are some examples of quality strength training that you'd recommend?
Yeah, compound movements. So multi-joint movements that are going to require a lot of musculature to be involved. So here, like I mentioned earlier, push-up, right? A squat, a lot of legs, a lot of muscles in your legs involved in that, a deadlift, right? A pull up or a pull down or some sort of inverted row. Those are where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. So would I be doing bicep curls? No. I like my arms. I like biceps. I like triceps too. But that's not where I would concentrate my effort. And that's not where you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of the benefits of exercise. So stick with the big muscles, stick with the compound movements, 2 to 3 times, 20, 30 minutes.
And do you recommend, because I know at one point, I think last episode, we talked about weights. Do you recommend like these compound movement workouts along with weights?
Oh, yeah. I love weights. You got to put weights on everything, right? Yeah. You got to put weights on everything. I mean, think about it, right? I could sit down. I could do squats here for a long period of time. I can just sit and squat and squat and squat. But the minute you give me 50 pounds or 100 pounds or put 200 pounds in my hands or on my spine, then it's going to become much more difficult. And that's going to actually challenge my musculature. And that's going to allow me to grow or maintain those muscles. And that's what we're trying to do, right? Especially at midlife, right? We're trying to get some growth if we can and we're trying to maintain that musculature. And in order to do it, we got to challenge it. And in order to challenge it, we need more than just our body weight.
And heavy weights and less sets, or more sets and less weight?
Yeah, so heavy weights, meaning you can do it, particularly somebody with high cortisol. So let's go back to that, because it's different. You know, the recommendation for exercise reps, sets, and all that stuff, it changes based on the dynamic and the situation and the case that's in front of you. But in terms of cortisol levels, all we're looking to do is maintain those levels, maintain our musculature. So that 6 to 10, that 8 to 10 rep range is a very good place to be. I wouldn't go high into the point of exhaustion, and I wouldn't go too low to where it was so heavy that I was struggling to lift it. So a weight that you can lift, 6 to 10 times is a solid weight to use for exercise.
And then these compound movements and strength training will actually help lower cortisol levels, right?
For sure. You're going to get some growth hormone activity. You're going to get some testosterone activity. Those help combat it. You're also going to be able to maintain your musculature. It's going to hold off insulin resistance. So there's just so many benefits to it that, I mean, it really is. It's like a miracle medicine for your body, regardless of what your scenario is, especially at midlife, right? You're not playing this midlife game if you're not playing it properly, if you're not, doing some resistance training.
Absolutely. And then beyond working out and things like that, obviously we know that nutrition plays a key role. Are there specific foods or supplements that help to regulate stress hormones and also support weight loss?
Yeah, so food wise, absolutely, food always plays a part. It's it's at the top of the chain. Proteins and healthy fats, obviously that's going to help regulate blood sugar, and that's going to support muscle growth as well. So you want to make sure you got protein, healthy fats. You want to eat foods that are high in magnesium. Foods like spinach and almonds and dark chocolate, those are food that are going to help with the relaxation part of managing your stress, excuse me. So, those become, very much important. You want to stay away from the processed foods, the sugary foods, the simple carbs, because those are just going to send your blood sugar up and just going to actually ultimately increase your cortisol levels. Adaptogens are also good, right? Ashwagandha, which you're seeing a lot of foods and food items with that in it now. Holy basil, all those type of adaptogens are very good in helping to lower cortisol levels and kind of help to manage your stress. In terms of supplements, I would make sure there's a B complex in there, right? Because that helps, work on your adrenals, on your, adrenaline system. That'll give it some support. I'd probably have a probiotic in there for your stomach, just in terms of gut health. And, when you're going through a stressful situation and that fight or flight's going on, a lot of people notice that they have some stomach discomfort. And that's because your body's trying to divert blood from your stomach and send it to the areas where you need it, and so having, a healthy gut, is always good. And also along with that, consuming enough fiber and fiber-rich foods, that is also going to help with your stress levels and cortisol levels and being able to manage it much better. So those are the food items. And, there's, supplements. I'd supplement with magnesium also. It helps with muscle recovery. It's going to help with sleep. I'm sure there's one or two more, but, obviously you can consult a professional, a physician in terms of if your cortisol levels are really, really high. We use Thorne supplements. They've got something for cortisol levels that we just recommend. for clients who really test with high cortisol levels. And if someone's interested, just, put the email in there or just ask the question and we'll send them out the actual supplements that we recommend.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. I'm curious.
Omega-3 fatty acids too. Omega-3 fatty acids would be one that I would recommend simply because, the effects of stress on the heart, inflammation on the brain, this will help to offset them. So, and you can eat omega-3 foods, right? We got some foods that we can eat, the salmons and I'm drawing a blank here. Walnuts is one, flaxseed. Flaxseed's the one I was looking for.
And then I know there's a lot of vitamins that are kind of like all in one. When it comes to supplements like this, do you think it's a good idea to take them separately? Or I know you mentioned some supplements that...
No. I mean, I think an all-in-one cortisol support or adrenal support would be very good. I mean, because there's a lot of different items that they put in those combinations that kind of support your health. So absolutely, I would recommend a multivitamin or some sort of cortisol support or adrenal support if you're struggling in that area.
And then what do you say are like the biggest dietary mistakes that people do that actually make stress worse and not better?
Number one, skipping meals. Don't skip meals. If you've got high cortisol levels, when you skip meals, that just increases your cortisol levels, right? And then that also makes you hungrier. And then there's that desire for your body for more energy already. So now guess what you're going to do? You're going to go for the sugar and the high carb foods. So I would never skip meals. Don't drink too much coffee, right? That's also going to increase your cortisol levels. So, excessive caffeine, no good. Some caffeine, okay. Excessive caffeine, definitely not a good thing. And then limit the sugar. All three of those: skipping meals, excessive caffeine, eating sugar, too much sugar. All of those are going to increase your cortisol levels. So those are things that you do not want to do from a healthy standpoint or from a nutrition standpoint if you've got high cortisol levels. Stay away from the processed foods as well.
And then talking about skipping meals, if someone does have high cortisol and may not have a big appetite and they may have been fasting or things like that, do you recommend just smaller meals throughout the day if they don't have a big appetite versus waiting and having like a bigger meal?
Yeah, well, I always recommend smaller meals. Like you want to give your body food consistently. That helps to balance your blood sugar. So, you don't want a big heavy meal all at once. I know some people are doing the one meal a day type thing. I wouldn't recommend that for someone who's got high cortisol levels. You need to feed your body nutrient dense food consistently with quality proteins and a significant amount of fiber and good healthy fats. And I would give my body doses of that throughout the day. So 3-4 times at a minimum.
And I think that's great information, especially for someone who is struggling with cortisol and trying to do all the things and fast and taking all the wrong approaches, I feel like, are what we hear so common, so often. So it's great to hear an educated, well-knowledgeable opinion on all of these things. And we also know that stress isn't just about weight, right? It affects our relationship, our mindset, and even how we feel about ourselves. How do you coach your clients through the emotional side of stress and burnout?
Yeah, stress affects everything. It affects your outlook. It affects your behavior, right? It definitely affects your relationship, especially if you're irritable all the time, right? Nobody wants to be around somebody who's always irritable. And so there's a couple things that I recommend, and there's some things that I do, because everybody doesn't walk in the door saying, "Hey, I'm stressed, help me." That's not what they say. They say, "Hey, I want to lose some weight. I'm trying everything and it's not happening. Can you help me?" And then through that research process is when, it gets identified, But the first thing I say is, give yourself some grace. Don't beat up on yourself, especially when you're in a stressful situation or feeling it. You got to show yourself some love. All right. And so that's the first thing that I always encourage. Like you can control how you respond. You may not be able to control the situation, but you can control how you respond. And staying within your circle of influence gives you power. And when you feel like you've got power over the situation, that alone will help manage the stress, right? Thinking that, you can't do anything about it and you got this big stress monster on your back, that just makes the situation worse. So, give yourself some grace, control what you can control, right? And then, you got to do things like managing your stress by meditation. You got to make sure that you are surrounding yourself in an environment with people who are supportive, or environments who are supportive of the situation, so that the stress doesn't feel so overwhelming and so that you don't feel alone. I often find, particularly with my female clients, setting boundaries and saying no is a great way to manage your stress, because you're trying to please too many people and you're suffering and you're taking that on as well. So setting boundaries also helps, and then, in the end of the day, weight loss is great and looking good is great. But when we're talking about stress and we're talking about anything else, it's really about feeling good, right? And feeling yourself and managing situations the way that help you be your best. So stress and managing stress and stressful situations and emotional situations, forget the weight, put that on the side, right? And let's get you feeling good first. And those things typically help, just identifying what it is, right? Realizing what you can do and focusing just on that, getting the support of the people that you need support from, will help do it. And then all those other things that we talked about earlier, making sure you got some exercise in there to blow off some steam, but not ridiculous, and then making sure that you're getting some walking and some yoga and some fresh air, like that's good for managing stress. Fresh air is, and actually even getting up and just stretching, and just, releasing some of that tension, especially if you're sitting at work, just banging on the keyboard all day and, feeling all stressed. Just get up, stretch for a little bit, move around. Okay, come on back. You feel better and like that fast, So those are the things that I recommend, for myself and for clients who may be going through it or dealing with a stressful situation.
Absolutely. I know when I'm sitting at my desk all day, I get into a rut. So getting up and moving and stretching it out definitely always feels better.
Oh, yeah. And getting outside, nature heals as well.
Right now it's warming up a little bit here.
That's
At
right.
least in New
Getting some
York,
sun and getting some fresh air. Like those are, that's medicine. That's good stuff, especially for people with high cortisol levels.
Absolutely. The sun makes such a huge impact.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like really just prioritizing yourself is one of like the key ways really to combat that and really shift your mindset.
Yeah, that's always, I think, number one, is your health. And so you got to take care of yourself. People may come to your aid in need, but it's your responsibility to take care of yourself. And that's what it comes down to. And when it comes down to high cortisol levels and stress, stress kills. And that's the reality. We're talking about weight and all that kind of stuff, but it can be a killer to any weight loss, but it can definitely be detrimental to your own health. And so you want to make sure you're dealing with it.
Thank you for shedding so much light on such a misunderstood topic today and really I feel like I learned so much. I'm sure our listeners have learned so much as well, especially those who are struggling with high cortisol levels, and really educating us on how stress hormones can influence our life in different ways.
Sure. It's intended to be a good thing.
Yes.
It's just, we're not, the stress that we deal with is not stress that's going to need us to kind of fight or flight. When you're sitting at work or dealing with difficult situations or just everyday situations, we gotta realize that, the evolutionary process, we were dealing with a lot different kinds of stress than we do today.
Absolutely. And I know we're wrapping up this episode 4 of Midlife Unleashed. And I know next episode is an episode I'm super excited about, talking a little bit about GLP medications and how they've kind of taken over everyone at this point. It's kind of heard about our GLP medication. So I am excited for the next episode, which we'll chat about that. But thank you so much for teaching us everything you taught us today on episode 4. And we will see you soon for episode 5. Like I said, we'll be talking about GLP-1 medications.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that conversation. They're hot.
They're hot. I am definitely very excited to learn more from someone with an educated point of view and expertise. So thank you again for listening in to episode 4, and we will talk soon.
All right. You take care.
Thanks.